The morning sun cast golden hues over my Victorian home, a house that stood proudly for 3 generations. The purple trim, hand-painted by my grandmother, glowed warmly as I rocked gently on the porch swing, sipping my morning coffee. The wind chimes, a gift from my mother, played their familiar tune in the breeze. I never imagined that this quiet moment would be one of my last in a home I loved. From the corner of my eye, I spotted Karen Thompson, the self-appointed leader of our neighborhood's newly formed Homeowners Association, HOA, marching toward my mailbox. She clutched an envelope like it held the keys to a kingdom. My stomach tightened. I had seen this look before, determined, smug, and dangerously confident. Karen had been trying to force me into her HOA for months. She claimed it was for the betterment of the community, but I knew the truth. She wanted control, to turn our unique, character-filled homes into a beige, cookie-cutter utopia. And I was the last holdout. She slid the envelope into my mailbox, then lingered, pulling out her phone to snap pictures of my front yard. My grandmother's rose bushes, a historic treasure, stood in stark contrast to Karen's perfectly trimmed boxwood hedges. I knew she hated them. I took a deep breath. I had faced tougher opponents in my 20 years as a federal judge, but something about Karen's persistence made my instincts scream. This wasn't over. That evening, I opened the envelope. It was a formal invitation to join the HOA, wrapped in an expensive glossy brochure filled with identical beige houses, matching mailboxes and neatly trimmed lawns. But that wasn't what made my hands shake. Attached was a list of required modifications. White heavy checkmark repaint my house in an HOA-approved color, which meant no more purple trim. White heavy checkmark remove my rose garden, to be replaced with HOA-approved shrubbery. White heavy checkmark take down my antique wind chimes, because they were too loud. White heavy checkmark pay an immediate $5,000 membership fee, plus $350 in monthly dues. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't an invitation. It was a demand. I had no legal obligation to join, and Karen knew it, but she wasn't asking. As I peered out my window, I saw her on her phone, watching my house. Her voice carried through the still evening air. She has to join. She's the last one. Once we get her property in line, the neighborhood's value will skyrocket. I exhaled slowly, my grip on the paper tightening. This wasn't about community. It was about money and control. The next morning, I woke up to bright orange violation notices taped to my front door. Heavy checkmark grass too long. It was less than half an inch over regulation. Heavy checkmark non-regulation paint color. My home had been this color for 60 years. Heavy checkmark unapproved garden structures. My grandmother's roses. Karen wasn't wasting any time. By midweek, I caught 2 HOA members measuring my lawn with a ruler, while Karen dictated violations to her assistant, Barbara. 11.5 inches, she announced dramatically, as if she'd uncovered a national scandal. I stepped outside, coffee in hand. "You're trespassing," I said calmly. Karen gave me a plastic smile. "Oh, we're just ensuring the community stays beautiful. Don't you care about property values? I care about something bigger. History. Integrity. My rights." I locked eyes with her. This house isn't just property. It's my family's legacy. Her smirk faltered. That night, I installed security cameras. I had a sinking feeling. This was just the beginning. The harassment escalated in ways both subtle and insidious. Heavy checkmark anonymous complaints to the city, all dismissed, but the visits from code enforcement were relentless. Heavy checkmark landscapers arrived at dawn, without my request, claiming they were sent to fix violations. Heavy checkmark bright security lights installed on HOA homes were conveniently angled into my bedroom window, making sleep impossible. And then they got personal. One evening, I noticed HOA board members taking photos of my foundation. Their whispers made my stomach turn. "Looks like structural concerns," one muttered. "Might need emergency repairs," another added. They were building a case, a reason to condemn my home. But nothing prepared me for what I saw at midnight. Through my security cameras, I watched as Karen and 2 HOA members sneaked onto my property, carrying chemical sprayers. I rushed outside, phone recording in hand. "What do you think you're doing?" Karen jumped, but quickly recovered, her usual sugary voice returning. "Oh, we're just eliminating some invasive species," she purred, spraying my grandmother's roses. I stepped forward, shaking with anger. "These aren't weeds, Karen. They're heritage roses, planted in 1960. I have the documentation." Her smile flickered. "Well, someone complained about the smell. The next morning, my roses were dead. That was the final straw. By now, I had pieced together the pattern. Keycap 1 Step 1. Harass homeowners until they break or sell. Keycap 2 Step 2. Declare homes as violation to justify forcing them out. Keycap 3 Step 3. Buy properties for pennies on the dollar, then resell for millions. I visited the county records office and uncovered dozens of cases. Heavy checkmark homes that mysteriously caught fire after rejecting the HOA. Heavy checkmark owners who faced endless violations until they were forced to sell. Heavy checkmark, every one of these properties ended up in the hands of one investment group, a company connected to Karen's sister-in-law. That night, a new realization hit me. The HOA wasn't just about control. They were running a real estate scam. And now, they had set their sights on my home. The fire that changed everything. The next morning, I was in court, sentencing a corrupt CEO when my clerk burst into the room. "Your Honor, your house. It's on fire." My blood ran cold. I raced home, my heart pounding. Black smoke rose into the sky, my grandmother's purple trim being consumed by angry orange flames. And standing in her driveway, sipping coffee, was Karen, watching, smiling. She had pushed too far. I clenched my fists. She thought she had won, but she made one fatal mistake. She didn't know who she was dealing with. I stood in the ashes of my home, the charred remains of my grandmother's purple trim crumbling between my fingers. Karen had won the battle, but she had just declared war on the wrong person. I took a deep breath, forcing my emotions down. Grief would come later. Right now, I needed answers. I spent the next 24 hours going through every piece of security footage, my hands shaking with rage. But when I tried to access the files from the night of the fire, they were gone. The system had been tampered with. At exactly 3 a.m., 4 hours before the fire started, I exhaled sharply. This wasn't just an accident. It was a well-planned attack. I drove to the county records office, digging into every property that had mysteriously burned down in the last 5 years. The pattern was undeniable. Keycap 1 target non-HOA homeowners. Keycap 2 harass them until they're desperate. Keycap 3 if they don't sell, destroy their homes. Keycap 4 buy the land dirt cheap, flip it for millions. And every burned down house had been bought by one shell company, owned by Karen's sister-in-law. A chill ran down my spine. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was running a criminal operation, and she thought she could get away with it. Not this time. The next morning, I arrived at what was left of my home, sifting through the wreckage. The smell of burnt wood and smoke still lingered in the air. I heard a smug voice behind me. Such a shame. Karen. She was standing on the sidewalk, coffee cup in hand, lips curled into a fake frown. "You should have joined us," she sighed, feigning sympathy. "Maybe then your home would have been safer." I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. This woman set my house on fire and was standing here gloating about it. I took a slow step toward her, keeping my voice calm. "Karen," I said, locking eyes with her, "do you ever wonder what happens when you push the wrong person too far?" For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. She didn't know what I was planning. Good. Let her wonder. That night, I sat in a cheap motel, staring at a wall covered in evidence. Heavy checkmark security footage of Karen's HOA goons trespassing on my property. Heavy checkmark financial records showing money laundering through property sales. Heavy checkmark fire department reports listing suspicious circumstances in past fires. Heavy checkmark photos of HOA board members inspecting my home days before it burned. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. But I needed more. I made a call. "This is Judge Sarah Martinez. I need a favor." My friend at the FBI picked up instantly. "Tell me everything." I knew Karen was watching me, waiting for me to break down. But instead of reacting, I vanished from public view. For 2 months, I built my case in silence. Heavy checkmark, I hired a private investigator who uncovered whistleblowers. Former HOA members too afraid to speak until now. Heavy checkmark, I dug through Karen's tax records, exposing undeclared earnings from property flips. Heavy checkmark, I had the FBI wiretap a former HOA treasurer, capturing her admitting to fraud and extortion. Heavy checkmark, I found bribed city officials who were willing to talk in exchange for a deal. Meanwhile, Karen was getting bolder. She mocked me at HOA meetings, claiming I was a bitter, homeless woman who couldn't afford to rebuild. She even tried to auction off my land. While my case was still active, I watched her dig her own grave. And when the time was right, I made my move. It was the night of the big HOA meeting. Karen was standing at the front of the community hall, smiling like a queen addressing her subjects. "Tonight," she announced, "we finalized plans for our neighborhood improvement project." A PowerPoint slide flickered onto the screen. Lot number 24, former property of Sarah Martinez. Pending sale, $50,000. The crowd murmured. One man raised his hand. "I thought the insurance was still investigating the fire." Karen laughed, waving a hand dismissively. "Oh, please. There was nothing suspicious about it." "I object." The room fell silent. I stood at the back, slowly making my way down the aisle. Every eye in the room turned toward me. Karen's smirk vanished. "You don't have the right to be here." "Oh, but I do." I pulled out a thick folder and spread the evidence across the table. Heavy checkmark security footage of Karen's team tampering with my property. Heavy checkmark financial statements proving fraud. Heavy checkmark emails discussing accidental fires. Heavy checkmark testimonies from HOA victims, many in this very room. Karen turned pale. "This is nonsense," she snapped. "You have no authority here." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my judicial robe. The room gasped. "I'm Judge Sarah Martinez," I said, watching Karen's world crumble. "And this case has been escalated to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The doors burst open. FBI agents flooded the room, badges flashing. "Karen Thompson," an agent said, "you are under arrest for fraud, arson, extortion, and conspiracy." Karen's coffee mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Her husband tried to run. He didn't make it past the exit. One by one, every corrupt board member was let out in handcuffs. The neighborhood erupted in applause. Years of fear, intimidation, and destruction finally over. And Karen? She wouldn't be harassing anyone from prison. Karen Thompson, the queen of the HOA, was no longer strutting around the neighborhood. Instead, she was sitting in a cold courtroom, her perfectly styled blonde hair now flat and lifeless, her expensive suit wrinkled from a sleepless night in jail. The once smug and untouchable woman now looked small. As I stepped into the judge's seat, her face turned ghost white. She gripped her lawyer's arm, whispering, "That's her, the one whose house we burned." Her lawyer dropped his pen. I held my gaze steady. Karen had tried to bully, harass, and destroy me. She had stolen homes, ruined lives, and built an empire on fear and fire. But today, justice was mine. The FBI presented the evidence. One by one, the dots connected. Heavy checkmark 15 homes burned down over the past 5 years, always non-HOA members. Heavy checkmark every property mysteriously purchased by Karen's sister-in-law for pennies on the dollar. Heavy checkmark secret HOA meetings discussing how to push out uncooperative homeowners. Heavy checkmark emails proving bribery of local officials. Heavy checkmark, and worst of all, security footage of Karen and her board members spreading gasoline around my property at 2 a.m. The courtroom gasped as the tape played. And then the final betrayal. Karen's own husband testified against her. "She planned everything," he said, voice shaking. "She picked the targets. She made the threats. She wanted their land, and if they didn't give in, she took it." Karen screamed liar, but it didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Karen Thompson, you are sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, arson, and extortion." Her world had crumbled. And just like that, Karen Thompson, the terror of the neighborhood, was gone. The weeks that followed felt surreal. The HOA was officially dissolved. Without Karen's iron grip, the neighborhood finally breathed again. People stepped outside without fear being fined for a flower pot being the wrong color. Neighbors, once too scared to speak out, started helping each other again. And the biggest surprise? The remaining HOA funds, money that Karen had stolen from the community, were returned. Instead of finding people, the neighborhood came together and used the money to repair the damage Karen had caused. In my home, it was time to rebuild. The day the construction crew arrived, I stood at the edge of the lot, staring at the burned remains of my grandmother's home. The last piece of purple trim sat in my hand, charred but still recognizable. I closed my eyes. You don't win by burning something down. Karen, you win by building something stronger. Brick by brick, my home was reborn. This time, it wasn't just my battle. It was the entire neighborhood's. Heavy Checkmark people volunteered to help paint. Heavy Checkmark, an old carpenter, helped restore the porch railings. Heavy Checkmark, even kids helped plant the new garden, bringing fresh flowers to replace the ones Karen had destroyed. And when it was done, I made one final decision. I painted the trim purple again, because no one would ever tell me what my home should look like again. The news of Karen's downfall spread like wildfire. Reporters covered the corruption scandal, interviewing former homeowners who had lost everything to Karen's greed. One family, the Patels, had been forced to sell their home when they couldn't keep up with HOA fines. They were now moving back in, thanks to community donations. Mrs. Rodriguez, the retired teacher, had lost precious family photos when her home mysteriously burned down. A local photographer offered to restore them, bringing her to tears. And the best part? The house Karen once lived in, the McMansion where she plotted all her schemes, it was sold. And the new owners? A kind immigrant family who didn't care about property values or whose mailbox was which color. They cared about community. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like home again. One afternoon, I sat on my newly rebuilt porch, rocking in my grandmother's swing, coffee in hand. The sun set in stunning shades of pink and gold. Just like it used to, my neighbor, Mr. Patel, waved from his porch. "Judge Martinez," he called, grinning. "How does it feel to win?" I looked at my home, the purple trim, the rose garden, the wind chimes singing in the breeze. Karen had tried to erase my history. Instead, she had made me fight for it harder. I held up a small souvenir, Karen's old coffee mug, the one she had dropped in shock when she realized who I was. Justice takes time, but it always wins. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply rebuilding something more beautiful than what was destroyed. The end.